Amir woke before dawn, as he did every day, to the soft hush of the desert wind brushing against the thin wooden shutters of his small home. He would slip on his worn sandals, carefully avoiding the loose floorboard by the door, and step into the cool morning air. In those quiet moments, he would whisper a simple prayer, thanking the sky for another day and asking for strength to guide his young students with kindness and patience. Teaching was more than a job to him, it was a calling. He believed that words carried power, and that even the poorest child could soar beyond their humble village through the gift of reading and writing. On that fateful morning, however, Amir's world shifted in an instant. A convoy of armored vehicles rattled down the dusty road, and soldiers poured into the town square with rigid discipline. They trampled the market stalls and spilled into the narrow alleys where children chased stray cats. Amir paused at the edge of the crowd, heart pounding, as a stern-faced officer barked orders in a language he barely recognized. He clenched his books tightly to his chest. "Who is Amir al-Sadi?" the officer demanded. His harsh voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. Amir dropped his books. "I am," he said, voice trembling. Without a word, the officer slapped a pair of rough handcuffs around Amir's wrists. No one explained why. Neighbors stared from behind their doorways, mouths open in horror. A group of his students watched in dazed confusion as the soldiers forced him into the back of a rolling jeep. The morning song of birds was swallowed by the roar of the engine. Over the next few days, rumors spread faster than wildflowers after spring rain. The local magistrate had accused Amir of stealing a large sum of money from the municipal treasury. Witnesses came forward with icy confidence, pointing fingers and naming dates that did not match. A key piece of evidence was a torn page from Amir's lesson plan, claimed to be proof of a ledger entry, though no one could explain how classroom notes turned into financial records at the trial. The courtroom was cold and distant. The magistrate sat on a raised dais, his robes flowing like dark clouds, and peered down at Amir through half-closed eyes. The judge's gavel slammed the bench like distant thunder each time a witness spoke. Amir's pleas of innocence echoed faintly against the tall stone walls. He spoke of his life, how he rose each morning to open the schoolhouse door, how he prepared lessons by candlelight, how he gave his own meager salary to feed children whose families could not afford even a crust of bread. But his words fell flat. By the third day, it was clear that truth meant nothing in that place. The villagers whispered behind cloth scarves that a local official had gone missing, along with a large portion of public funds. They murmured that he needed a scapegoat to cover his tracks, and Amir, with his gentle reputation and lack of connections, was the perfect victim. Yet no one dared speak openly. Fear wrapped itself around every tongue. When the magistrate pronounced sentence, Amir felt as if the ground beneath him had turned to ice. 7 years in the state prison beyond the north. Gates, 7 years of cold cells, harsh guards, and the bitter ache of injustice. His mother, her silver hair tied neatly in a bun, wept quietly in the gallery. Little Leela pressed her pale cheeks against the iron bars, eyes wide with confusion and sorrow. "Papa will be home soon," she whispered, but her voice was small enough that even her own heart might have missed it. The journey to the prison was cruel and silent. Shackled in pairs, the prisoners marched under armed escort through the burning sun. The wind carried the stench of sweat and old tears. Amar walked beside a grizzled man whose face was carved by sorrow. He introduced himself in a hushed tone, his voice rough from disuse. Others followed in time, murmuring their names and stories. In the broken music of hope and loss, once inside the walls, Amir discovered that the prison was a kingdom of despair. The cells were small, no larger than a storage closet, with only a narrow sliver of sky visible through a high-grated window. The food was thin, barley gruel and stale bread. Every so often, the guards would bestow a handful of dates, as if performing an act of mercy. At night, the prisoners lay on bare stone floors, their blankets thin and worn. The darkness whispered tales of regret and longing. Yet amid the gloom, a spark of light endured. Amir realized that his gift for teaching could serve a new purpose here. Each morning he offered lessons to any inmate who wished to learn. He drew letters in the dust with a stick, showing men how symbols formed words. He scribbled sentences on scraps of discarded paper, teaching the simplest of poems and the basics of arithmetic. Some days a group of weary men would sit in a circle. Around him, their faces shaded by exhaustion, but their eyes bright with curiosity. One of his early pupils was Ibrahim, a former merchant sentenced for debt. Ibrahim had eyes like fading embers, and when he first arrived he could barely sign his own name. Amir spent hours patiently guiding his hand, forming each letter with deliberate care. Over time, Ibrahim's writing grew bold. He began to read the prayer book he carried, mumbling each sentence until the words found clarity. Then others joined Dan, ex-soldier, a young man trapped by a single bad choice, a nameless old man whose life had been defined by regrets. Through teaching, Amir found a measure of peace. His own worries, his mother alone at home, his daughter losing her father's guiding hand, flickered at the edges of his heart, but he forced them aside during lessons. He believed that if he could raise the spirits of these men, if he could share even a small seed of knowledge, then his own darkness would not overwhelm him. Each time a prisoner learned a new word or solved a simple sum, Amir felt a quiet joy, as though he and that student had reclaimed a piece of their humanity. Word of the classes spread even to the guards. Some officers sneered, calling Amir a meddler, but others looked on in silent respect. A kindly guard named Hassan would sometimes slip him an extra crust of bread or a small cup of clean water. "I see the good you do," Hassan would whisper, "and I admire it." Yet Hassan, bound by duty and fear of punishment, could offer nothing more. In the evenings, as the sun dipped behind the prison towers, Amir would lie on his cot and imagine home. He pictured his mother tending the small flower garden outside. Their door, her hands gentle as she coaxed daisies from the earth. He saw Leela sitting at their makeshift desk, her forehead creased in concentration as she traced letters in a tattered workbook. He imagined the crisp scent of morning tea drifting through their kitchen, like a soft blanket against the chill of the cell. Still, hopelessness would creep in, sometimes at night. He would wake to the sound of crying from down the hall. In those moments he felt the full weight of his own fate. 7 years was a lifetime in that place. 7 years in which his daughter might grow up without him. 7 years of stolen mornings and muted laughter. He wondered if anyone outside would ever remember him, or if the town would simply move on, forgetting the kind teacher who vanished one spring morning. Yet each time despair threatened to swallow him, Amir returned to his lessons. He reminded himself that knowledge was a gift that could never be taken away. If he could keep that flame alive, for himself and for others, then perhaps one day the world beyond the prison walls would notice. Perhaps one day someone would hear their stories, see the truth, and set him free. Until then, he held fast to hope, hope as fragile as a single page of a book, but strong enough to light the darkness. Leela al-Hashami rose before the sun, though not by choice. As a royal guard, she was sworn to protect the sovereign and watch over the palace grounds, and mornings began early. Yet today she did not head to the guardhouse. Instead, she slipped into the grand audience hall where diplomats often gathered for meetings. Her uniform was crisp and dark, the silver emblem on her chest polished until it caught the light like a small star. Despite the weight of her armor, she moved with quiet grace, her boots clicking softly on the marble floor. The hall was bright with morning light, and across the long table a visiting envoy from a distant land spoke loudly of trade agreements and alliances. Leela stood near the back, ostensibly on duty, but her mind wandered as she scanned the faces around her. She had heard many stories in her years at court, tales of injustice in the provinces, whispers of people crushed by corrupt officials. Such stories felt distant, as though they belonged to another world. Then she heard something that pierced her routine. The envoy mentioned a man named Amir al-Sadi. His name drifted through the air like a question. Ow. Leela's heart skipped. Amir al-Sadi, a humble teacher, had been arrested and imprisoned for a crime he did not commit, or so rumors said. She leaned forward, careful not to draw attention. The envoy spoke of missing funds in a small-town treasury and of a kind teacher who had served his community faithfully for years before being accused. He said that the real culprit was still at large, but no one dared speak the truth out loud. Lila closed her eyes for a moment. In the still darkness, behind her eyelids, she saw a dusty classroom filled with eager faces, small hands raising questions. She thought of her own childhood, when a patient teacher had opened her mind to the world beyond palace walls. She remembered the soft voice that had taught her letters and poetry, and she felt a tug in her chest, an echo of a debt she still owed to that kindness. When the meeting ended, Leela lingered. Diplomats and advisors filed out, leaving the hall almost empty. She approached the envoy, her posture formal. "Forgive me," she said, voice calm but firm. "You spoke of Amir al-Sadi. What do you know of his case?" The envoy turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Not much," he admitted, "but enough to know that his trial was a sham. I heard testimony was coerced, documents falsified. Someone powerful wanted him out of the way." Layla nodded slowly. "Do you have proof?" He shook his head. "Only whispers. I have no papers. But I know that the magistrate who oversaw the trial is a close ally of the missing official. And I have heard that certain witnesses were threatened." Threatened? The word echoed through Leela's mind. She knew the weight of fear, how it could bend truth until it broke. She pressed on. "Where can I find the trial records?" The envoy thought a moment. "At the provincial courthouse in Airline. Be warned, it is not safe for outsiders. To ask too many questions, the magistrate holds great influence." Lila's jaw tightened. She had lived her life by rules and duty, yet now she felt a fierce spark of something stronger, justice. She bowed her head politely, then slipped away before drawing more attention. In the corridors, she found a quiet alcove and leaned against the cool stone, her mind racing. A plan formed, simple but dangerous. She would go to Airline in secret. She would read the trial transcript, interview witnesses, uncover the truth. And if she found proof of injustice, she would bring it to the sovereign himself. For the sake of a humble teacher, and for the sake of her own conscience, that night, under cover of darkness, Lela gathered what she needed. She exchanged her royal uniform for plain clothes, leaving her badge and sword locked away. She secured a fast horse and provisions, packing only essentials: water, simple food, a small satchel for documents. She saddled the mare in the stables, her breath visible in the cool air. The journey to Airline lasted 2 days. Lila rode through rolling hills and dusty plains, the landscape shifting from golden fields to rugged rock. She traveled by night and rested by day, careful to avoid main roads where royal patrols might notice. Each mile brought her closer to the truth and deeper into danger. When she arrived at the courthouse, the building loomed like a fortress. High walls surrounded it, and guards in provincial livery stood watch at the gates. Layla dismounted at a distance, her heart pounding. She forced herself to walk calmly toward the entrance, posture straight and eyes forward, as though she had every right to be there inside. The magistrate's clerk eyed her suspiciously. She claimed to be a parchment merchant seeking to sell supplies to the court. The clerk hesitated but took her papers and pointed to a side door. Leela nodded and slipped through, entering a dusty archive room stacked with scrolls and ledgers. She found the trial record among thick tomes. The parchment was yellowed and brittle, but the ink was clear. Leela unrolled it on a wooden table and read. The names of witnesses, the charges, the magistrate's rulings all laid bare. But one section stood out, a footnote indicating that the key testimony had been taken without an oath, recorded by a scribe known to work for the missing official. That called its validity into question. Next, Layla needed more proof. She left the archives and slipped into the town streets, blending into the crowd at the marketplace. There she found old Manara, the baker whose shop sat near the courthouse. Manara had watched the trial but did not speak. Layla approached her gently. "I heard you were at the trial," she said quietly. "Did you see anything unusual?" Manara glanced around as if fearing eavesdroppers. When she saw it was only Lila, she sighed. They brought Amir in shackles. The magistrate would not allow anyone to speak in his favor. But I saw the real ledger balanced. The money was there. Some clerk took pages to frame the teacher. Leela's eyes narrowed. Do you know who? The baker hesitated. A man in fine clothes, sleeves embroidered with the same crest as the missing official's family. He met the clerk late one night. They left together. Layla thanked Manara and slipped away. She needed one more voice, a guard who had worked at the courthouse. In a back alley near the south gate, she found the man drinking water from a jug. He froze when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" he spat out. She held up her hands in peace. "I'm looking for the truth about Amir al-Sadi. I have papers that show inconsistencies. Just need to confirm them." The guard's eyes darted. He gulped water and licked his lips. "I saw them," he admitted. "They forced the clerk to sign the false testimony. The magistrate threatened to ruin him if he refused. Then they locked him in a cell. He's still there. Another cell." The injustice piled higher. Lila nodded. "Thank you. Tell me where." He gave her directions, voice trembling. Leela hurried away, heart heavy but determined. At the holding cell, she bribed a small coin to the jailer and slipped inside. The clerk huddled in the corner, eyes red. Layla showed him the transcript, looked at the footnote and shook. "They made me lie," he whispered. "They said my family would suffer if I told the truth." Layla placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did right by telling me. I will protect you." She helped him write a sworn affidavit, stating the coercion. With that, she had the evidence she needed. The false testimony, the coerced confession, the missing official's involvement. Her satchel bulged with papers. Night was falling when she made her way back to her horse. The journey home would be long, but Leela felt a calm resolve. She had done what she set out to do. She had the proof to free an innocent man. As the palace gates came into view at dawn, Leela slipped back into her guard uniform. No one noticed her tired expression or the new burden she carried. She reported to the commander, who assumed she had been on a routine patrol. In her quarters, she laid out the documents on her desk. The parchment, the affidavits, the witness statements. They told a story of corruption and cruelty. She knew the king's private counsel would resist, that powerful men would try to bury the truth. But Leela was no longer just a guard following orders. She was a protector of justice, and she would not be silenced. Clutching the papers close, she prepared to face the council. Her heart pounded, but her spirit was strong. For Amir al-Sadi, for his family, and for every quiet voice, silenced by fear, she would speak the truth, and she would not rest until an innocent man walked free. Layla stood before the council chamber doors at dawn, the sunlight glinting off her polished breastplate. In her hands was the leather satchel containing every scrap of evidence. She had gathered in Airline, the yellowed trial transcript marked, with a forged footnote, Manara's trembling affidavit about the real ledger, the clerk's confession of coercion, and the guard's whispered statement about threats and bribes. Her heart pounded, but she straightened her back and reminded herself why she had come this far. She must save Amir. The chamber was a cavernous room of stone and tapestries, where the king's most trusted advisors met. Rich carpets muffled. Their footsteps and heavy drapes kept out prying eyes. Leela entered quietly, drawing curious glances from the council members seated around a long oak table. She saw the stern faces of Minister Jalid, a man with sharp eyes and a quick tongue. Lady Sophia, whose laughter once lifted spirits but now sounded hollow. And Chancellor Basir, who had the ear of the king himself. All regarded her as a dutiful guardian. One suspected the dangerous secret she carried. Leela approached the head of the table, where Chancellor Basir raised an eyebrow. "Captain al-Hashami," he said smoothly. "What do we owe this?" "Early visit. The king's morning ride will be here shortly." She forced her voice steady. "Chancellor, I have proof that Amir al-Sadi was wrongfully convicted. I request that you review these documents and reopen his case." A pause spread through the room. Jalid smirked, folding his hands. "Captain, Amir al-Sadi's case was closed by proper procedure." "Oh, why should we revisit it now after 7 years? Leela placed the transcript on the table and opened it to the marked page. "This footnote," she said, pointing, "shows that the key witness statement was recorded without a proper oath. It bears the seal of the magistrates, own scribe one who served the missing official. That alone demands scrutiny. Jalid leaned forward. A single footnote does not overturn a king's judgment. Deal with facts, not conjecture. Sophia's voice fluttered like a bird. We cannot disrupt the peace of the realm for a mere teacher. The sovereign has many matters pressing on his mind. She shrugged, as if sending an innocent child to her cellmate. Layla swallowed. This is not mere conjecture. I have affidavits from the clerk signed under oath, admitting coercion. I have testimony from a guard who saw threats made in the courthouse, and I have the baker's sworn statement that the money was never missing but hidden to frame a mirror. She laid each paper before them, waiting for acceptance. But each minister passed over them with practiced indifference. Wazir frowned and cleared his throat. Captain, your diligence is admirable, but the king's time is scarce. Cannot reopen every case that troubles a guard's conscience. Anger flared in Leela's chest, a deep gathering fire. But this is not about conscience alone. It is about justice. A man spends his life in prison for a crime he did not commit. His mother and daughter have waited 7 years for him. Does that not matter? Her voice echoed off the stone walls. The council exchanged glances. Jalid shrugged. The law is the law. He slid a parchment toward her. Turn to your duties, Captain. The matter is closed. Layla took a breath. To steady herself? My duty is to the crown and to the people it serves, she said softly. If the crown allows injustice beneath its watch, then it loses its honor. Silence. The minister studied her as if she were a curious bird. Sophia's lips twitched in a forced smile. Perhaps we underestimate your zeal. Lack the authority to compel the court to act. Leela forced out a nod. She tucked the parchment into her satchel. Then I will find another way. She turned and left the chamber, the heavy doors closing behind her with a final thud. Her heart ached, but her resolve hardened. The council's dismissal only proved how deeply corruption had taken root. If the ministers would not act, she must find the strength to do what they refused. In the courtyard, the morning air felt sharp. Guards polished swords and swept the stone paths. Lila paused beneath the marble colonnade, her breath forming small puffs in the cool light. She thought of Amir's daughter, little Lila, who must now be a curious teenager, wondering if her father was ever coming home. She thought of the schoolhouse, empty, silent, without his gentle voice guiding children. She could not look away from that truth. Over the next days, Layla worked in secret. She still performed her guard duties by day escorting envoys, attending court functions, training recruits, but by night she pored over her evidence, seeking allies. She wrote letters to trusted soldiers, promising reward and honor to any who would stand with her. She found Hassan, the kind guard from the prison, persuaded him to gather testimony from former inmates who had known Amir. She visited Manara again, collecting further details about the forged ledger. She even risked speaking with the missing officials, family members, planting seeds of doubt in their minds about the official's disappearance and the shadows still lingering over the magistrate's reputation. All the while, she kept her face calm and her words measured in daylight. No one suspected how close she came to tearing down a pillar of palace authority. She knew that if her plans were discovered, she could be stripped of rank, imprisoned, or worse. But every new piece of proof she obtained rekindled her hope. One night, she assembled her growing dossier in a hidden corner of the guard barracks. The stack of documents was tall enough to fill a small trunk. She covered the trunk with a blanket and placed her sword and badge atop it so that any routine search would overlook the papers. Then she lay awake on her cot, lantern light dancing across the wooden beams above her. Her mind raced. How to present this to the king himself? She knew counselors would intercept any direct petition. She needed a moment alone with the king to speak truth, to witness his justice firsthand. A chance came 2 nights later during the sovereign's masked ball. It was an event of celebration and splendor held in the palace garden under thousands of lanterns. Nobles in silk and velvet glided through the night, laughter echoing among rose bushes. Leela, in her guard uniform, stood on watch near the entrance. She noticed the king move through the crowd, greeting guests with a kindly smile. He seemed at ease, unaware of the injustices happening in his name. As he passed by, Layla stepped. "Forward, your majesty," she said, bowing low. The music paused as guests turned. The king's eyes met hers, and he nodded.
Captain.
Al-Hashimi, he said.
All is well?
She rose, raising her voice so only he could hear. No, Your Majesty, a grievous wrong has been done to a man named Amir al-Sadi. I have proof of his innocence. May I have a moment of your time? She gestured to her sword, a sign of unsheathed readiness. The king's brows furrowed. He excused himself from his companions, and Layla led him through a side gate past laughing courtiers to a small pavilion lit by a single lantern. She laid out the documents on a marble table and spoke swiftly. Of the forged ledger, the coerced clerk, the threatened witnesses. His eyes darkened as she handed him each piece of sworn testimony. When she finished, the lantern's glow fractured across the king's face. He looked weary, but not unkind. He asked a few quiet questions about the missing official, about the magistrate's ties to the case, about the danger she faced. Layla answered without hesitation, her voice unwavering. She saw something shift in him, a recognition of the corruption that could creep behind palace walls. At last he laid a hand on her shoulder. Your loyalty to justice honors the crown, he said quietly. I will not allow this injustice to stand. Ain't. He reached for the papers and spoke a command, so soft only she could hear. Prepare an order to bring Amir home. Layla exhaled, relief and gratitude flooding her chest. The king's direct intervention meant the council's obstruction would be bypassed. She bowed deeply. Thank you, Your Majesty. That night, a royal decree was drafted and sealed. Orders went out to release Amir at once, to investigate the corrupt official, and to hold the magistrate accountable. Leela knew the fight was far from over-powerful. Men would resist, and the council would bristle at being overlooked. But for the first time in 7 years, justice had its champion at the highest level. As dawn broke over the palace, Leela watched the first messengers ride out with the decree. She felt a quiet pride and a gentle hope stirring in her heart. The next steps would be difficult. There would be resistance, perhaps danger, but she had shown that a single person, armed with truth and courage, could break through walls of silence and fear. And she would not rest until Amir stood free. Ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT said, Leela rode through the silent countryside before dawn, the cold air biting at her cheeks. She wore her royal guard uniform, polished and neat, and carried the king's sealed order in a leather pouch at her waist. Clattered over the rough stones as she approached the tall prison walls for the second time in her life, and this time, she came not as a visitor, but as an agent of the crown's justice. At the main gate, the guards on duty recognized her uniform and straightened. Leela raised her chin and drew the pouch from beneath her cloak. By order of the sovereign, she announced, voice firm but low, open the gates at once. A hush fell over the guards. They exchanged nervous glances. Then, after a moment's hesitation, one of them slid back the heavy bolt. The gates creaked open, and Layla guided her horse inside the courtyard. The courtyard was dim in the early light. Rows of barracks lined one side, and a narrow path led toward the administration building. Layla dismounted and handed her reins to a trusted soldier, Hassan, who had agreed to help. Together, they made their way toward the warden's office. Each step echoed on the cold stone floor. Inside the warden's office, candles flickered on a wooden desk piled with ledgers and keys. Warden Farouk looked up, startled, when Layla entered with Hassan, who was a large man with graying hair and tired eyes, his uniform plain but neat. Captain al-Hashami, he said, standing quickly, should not be here. Layla met his gaze calmly. I have the king's order, she said, placing the sealed parchment on the desk. Read it. Farouk's eyebrows shot up. He broke the seal and read the command. Free Amir al-Sadi at once, pending full investigation, and ensure his safe return to the palace. The warden's face paled. This is an order from the sovereign himself, he stammered. He looked at Layla, then at Hassan. I have no choice. I must obey. He rose and bowed slightly. Once, Captain. Layla followed him. Out of the office and into the long corridor where rows of iron doors stood like silent sentinels. Each door bore a small window with thick bars. Farouk unlocked one door after another, calling out cell numbers as he went. A handful of sleepy prisoners peeked through the bars, their faces drawn with years of hard living. Layla kept her eyes forward, focused on the cell where Amir was held. At last they reached cell 47. Farouk inserted a heavy key into the lock. The bolt turned with a sharp click. The door swung open, revealing a narrow space dimly lit by a single torch. There, sitting on a thin mattress on the stone floor, was Amir. His shoulders were hunched, and his eyes looked up in surprise when he saw Leela and Hassan step inside. "Captain al-Hashami," he whispered, disbelief and hope mingling in his voice. He stood slowly, stepping toward them. His hands were free, no cuffs, bound him now. "Is it true? Am I to go free?" Lila nodded gently. "Yes, Amir, you are free. The king has seen the proof. You were innocent." She handed him a water skin. His hands trembled as he drank, tears glistening on his cheeks. Hassan moved to stand behind Lila. "We must hurry." "Duh. Other officials may arrive once they hear of this." Lila nodded and turned back to Amir. "Come with me. You must leave before word spreads." Amir gathered the small bundle of his belongings, a tattered blanket, a few scraps of bread, a worn book of poems his daughter once gave him. He paused, looking at Layla. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice was raw but steady. "You have given me back my life." Lila offered him an encouraging smile. "Let's go." They stepped out into the corridor, where Farouk closed the cell door behind them and removed the key from the lock. As they passed by other cells, whispers followed them like shadows. Prisoners peered through bars, mouths open, seeing hope where once was only despair. They reached the courtyard, where a small group of Hassan's men waited with 2 horses. The first horse carried Amir's bundle. The second was saddled and ready for him. Leela climbed onto her own horse. Hassan stayed with his mount, and Amir climbed up, holding the saddle horn. His legs were stiff from years of confinement, but his eyes shone with determination. As they moved toward the gate, alarm horns sounded in the distance. Guards down the corridor shouted. Someone must have discovered the warden's absence. Layla urged her horse forward. "Stay close," she instructed. Hassan rode beside Amir, covering their flank. Layla called back to Farouk, who watched from the gate, his face lined with regret. "Thank you for obeying the crown's will." Farouk raised a hand, his voice echoing in the open air. "May justice always guide you, Captain." The gate creaked shut behind them, and Leela locked the iron bars from the outside, sealing the prisoners back in. She placed the key in her pocket and galloped after Amir and Hassan. They raced across the courtyard, the ground trembling under their horses' hooves. Leela led them through a narrow side exit she had scouted earlier. They emerged onto a dirt path that wound through scrub and low hills, the prison walls looming like dark cliffs behind them. Amir breathed the cold morning air deeply, as if tasting freedom for the first time. His eyes filled with tears again. But this time they were tears of relief and joy. "I can't believe it," he said softly. "I feared I would die behind those walls." Lila rode closer, her uniform gleaming. "You will see your daughter next," she promised. "She has been waiting." She guided him down the path. Each step took them farther from the prison and closer to home. For the next hour, they kept 2 hidden trails, avoiding the main road. Hassan led the way, using knowledge he had gained from patrolling the countryside. They passed a small stream, where Amir paused to cup his hands and drink. The water was cold and clear. He washed his face, wiping away the grime of years. He drank more deeply, then wiped his mouth and looked up at Layla. "I owe you my life," he said. His voice trembled. "I cannot ever repay you." Layla shook her head. "You will repay by living. By teaching again, by being the man you were meant to be." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And by remembering that justice matters. Always." Amir nodded, swallowing hard. He looked at the sky, where faint light was breaking over the horizon. "I will," he he said. They continued the landscape, opening to fields of golden grass. In the distance, a cluster of houses marked Amir's village. As they drew near, a figure ran toward them, a woman in plain clothes, her arms outstretched. It was Amir's mother. Her hair had turned whiter over the years, but her eyes shone with the same gentle warmth that had comforted him as a child. "Mother!" Amir called, urging his horse forward. The woman dropped to her knees, tears streaming as she embraced him. "My son," she repeated over and over. Layla stayed back, allowing them their reunion, feeling a soft swell of happiness. In her chest, Layla noticed other villagers emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. They watched in stunned silence as Amir's mother held him close. Then, one by one, they began to cheer. Children ran out, laughing and crying, and the villagers gathered around, offering bread, water, and warm blankets. Amir lifted his mother's head and smiled through tears. He spotted Lila standing nearby. His eyes shone with gratitude. He rode his horse over to her and dismounted. "Captain al-Hashami," he said, bowing his head in respect. "Thank you?" She shook her head. "No thanks," she replied kindly. "The king has spoken. This is justice restored." She patted his shoulder. "Go home to your family." Amir's daughter, Leela's namesake, rushed forward then, her hair in loose curls and her eyes wide. She threw her arms around her father's leg, and he lifted her onto his horse behind him. She clung to him, burying her face in his back. Leela watched as father and daughter embraced, the morning sun illuminating their joy. Hassan approached, tipping his head in salute. "The royal carriage awaits, Captain. Orders have been given to bring them to the palace if they wish." Leela nodded, satisfaction warming her hands. She observed the happy family, then glanced back at the prison's distant silhouette. The walls had not fallen, but hope had found its way through. She turned to Hassan. "Let them decide. I have done my part." As she mounted her horse, the villagers began to chant Amir's name, their voices warm and full of praise. Leela urged her mare gently, the soft nickering carrying her away. Behind her, the village celebrated the return of a beloved teacher. A man free at last. Ahead of her lay new challenges, investigations, trials, reforms. But in that moment, Lila allowed herself a quiet smile. She had fulfilled her promise to justice, and a life had been renewed. Amir woke before dawn once more, but this time his heart was light. The sky was still deep blue, dotted with pale stars. He breathed in the cool morning air, rich with the scent of jasmine and fresh earth. Beside him, his daughter stirred beneath. A soft blanket, her small hand clutching his, gently kissed her forehead. "Papa's home," he whispered, and she smiled in her sleep. They walked together down the village path, where lanterns swung softly in the light breeze. Villagers greeted them with bows and tears of joy. Children skipped alongside, chattering about how Amir would teach them new poems and stories. My mother carried a basket of warm bread and cheese, pressing a piece into his hand. "Welcome back," she said simply, her eyes shining. Later that morning, a royal carriage arrived at the village square. Its polished wheels gleamed, and a guard stepped forward to announce that the sovereign invited Amir and his family to the palace for a formal pardon ceremony. Amir felt a flutter of nerves. He had once walked into prison, shackled and afraid. Now, he would walk into the grand hall as a free man, recognized by his king. He held his daughter's hand tightly and followed the guard. Inside the palace, the marble floors shone like water in sunlight. Tapestries of blue and gold lined the walls, telling stories of heroes and wise rulers. Servants in bright uniforms moved quietly, carrying trays of dates and sweet tea. Amir's mother gasped at the splendor. His daughter's eyes grew wide. As she stared at the vaulted ceilings in the great hall, banners of the kingdom hung from tall columns. The king sat on a raised dais, his robe soft crimson, a simple circlet of silver on his brow. His face was gentle, but his eyes held a keen intelligence. Beside him sat the councilsome with nervous expressions, others with scowls. Layla stood at attention among the royal guard, her armor polished and her posture proud. A herald stepped forward, trumpet in hand, and sounded a clear note that echoed through the hall. The court fell silent. The herald intoned, "By the will of His Majesty and in light of new evidence, Amir al-Sadi is hereby exonerated of all charges. Let justice be known and let truth guide our realm." Amir bowed deeply before the king. The king rose and extended his hand. "Rise, Amir," he said, voice warm. "You have suffered much for a crime you did not commit. Today we acknowledge this wrong and restore your honor." He placed a simple medallion around Amir's neck, silver disc embossed with the scales of justice. The court applauded softly. Layla stepped forward, and the king nodded to her. She knelt and received a royal commendation, a scroll praising her courage and loyalty. As she rose, she caught Amir's eye. He offered a grateful smile, and she nodded back, her jaw firm with quiet pride. After the ceremony, the king addressed the council. "Let this day mark a new chapter. We'll investigate the corrupt official who framed Amir and hold him accountable under our laws. We will review our courts to ensure that no innocent person suffers as Amir did." He looked at each council member. "In the eye, are you with me?" Some bowed quickly, choosing loyalty to the crown over old alliances. Others hesitated, their faces pale, but the king's resolve was clear. The reforms began at once. Orders went out to arrest the missing official, recover the embezzled funds, and ensure the magistrate faced trial for his role in the deception. News of these actions spread across the kingdom like wildfire, giving hope to people who had seen injustice go unpunished for too long. That evening, Amir and his family dined in a private chamber of the palace. The table was covered with fresh fruit, roasted lamb, and fragrant rice. Servants poured tea and offered sweet pastries. Amir's daughter giggled as she chased a piece of meat on her fork, and his mother smiled at every bite. Leela joined them. Sitting quietly at the head of the table, she spoke of the next steps, arranging for Amir's return to teaching, securing land for his family, and creating a scholarship fund in his name for students in need. Amir looked at Layla, awe in his eyes. "You did all this for me," he said softly. "How can I ever thank you?" She smiled. "By living well and teaching others the power of truth." She paused, then added, "And by remembering that courage can come from the smallest acts, teachers' kind words, a guard's quiet persistence." As the moon rose high, Amir's daughter yawned and leaned against her father. He carried her in his arms down the marble corridor, his mother following behind with a gentle laugh. Lila watched them go, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the banquet hearth. Justice had come, not with thunder or swords, but through the steady work of honest hearts. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its gentle rhythm. Amir reopened his small schoolhouse near the village, painting its walls fresh white and hanging curtains at the windows. Children gathered at sunrise, their laughter echoing in the courtyard. Amir taught them letters, poetry, and the value of fairness. He told them stories of hope and perseverance, always careful to credit the guard who believed in him. When no one else did, Leela returned to her duties at the palace, but made frequent visits to the school. She sat among the children, listening, as they recited poems she had never heard but which sparkled with innocence. Amir introduced her as a hero of justice, and the children applauded. She blushed as they covered her with questions, how she found the truth, what it felt like to stand before the king, whether she was ever afraid. She answered simply, telling them that fear is normal, but should never stop one from doing what is right. Back at the palace, the investigations unfolded. The corrupt official was found hiding in a distant province. He was brought before a court and faced the charges of embezzlement, coercion, and abuse of power. Protested, claimed innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses testified about forged documents, threats, and hidden ledgers. Eventually, he was stripped of his title and sentenced to prison, not the harsh state prison that Amir had known. A fair confinement with the chance to prove his reform. The magistrate who had condemned Amir was removed from office and required to undergo retraining in proper judicial procedure. The king established a new oversight council to review all criminal cases. Older than a year, and to investigate any claims of wrongful conviction. People across the kingdom wrote letters of gratitude and relief. Some asked for help with their own court cases. Others offered suggestions for further reforms. The king and his advisors listened, and slowly, the justice system grew more transparent and fair. Months passed, and the seasons turned. One autumn afternoon, Layla walked through a forest path near the school, where leaves had turned gold and red. She carried a small lantern as dusk settled. The path led to a clearing where villagers had built a simple monument of carved stone with Amir's name and the words "Injustice. We thrive." At the foot of the stone, children had placed flowers. Layla knelt and touched the cool surface. Tracing the letters with her fingertips, she stood and looked toward the schoolhouse, where candlelight shone through the windows. Voices drifted on the breeze. Amir's calm voice, guiding a new lesson. She felt a deep satisfaction. The world was not perfect, but change had begun. A single man's life had been restored, and with it, a spark of hope had spread across the land. As she turned to leave, Layla thought of the long road she had traveled from the royal guardhouse to the dusty courthouse, from secret meetings to the sovereign's ear. She had risked everything for a teacher she barely knew. Yet in doing so, she had found her own calling, to defend the innocent, to speak for those without a voice, and to remind her kingdom that justice is the foundation of peace. Under the glow of the lantern, she made a silent promise. She would continue to serve, to guard not only the palace but the spirit of fairness itself. And whenever doubt crept in, she would remember Amir's eyes, bright with tears of relief, and his daughter's innocent smile. That image would give her strength to stand firm, no matter how dark the road ahead. With one last glance at the monument, Layla walked back toward the village, her steps steady and sure. Behind her, the schoolhouse glowed warmly, a beacon of learning and justice. And in that glow, she saw the promise of a better tomorrow for one man freed, and for all who believed in the power of truth